A parish court judge has ruled that former Speaker of the House of Representatives Marissa Dalrymple-Philibert is to stand trial for allegedly filing false statutory declarations. Now, this relates to a Mercedes-Benz that Mrs. Dalrymple-Philibert says she forgot she had. What's the case really about, though? There are other details. I'm going to break it down for you. Thank you so much for joining me courtside. I'm Dionne Jackson-Miller. Stay tuned. Now, this case relates to an investigation report by the Integrity Commission into Mrs. Dalrymple-Philibert's statutory declarations over a 7-year period from 2015 to 2021. The story really involves two issues. It's the issue of Mrs. Dalrymple-Philibert not declaring the Mercedes-Benz, but also the issue of the fact that she bought the Benz using a duty concession, and whether who used it and who had it in their possession violated the terms and conditions of how you can use a vehicle bought by a duty concession, and I'll explain more in just a little bit. So I'm going to start with the Integrity Commission report, and as usual, I'll explain as I go. So in the summary of investigation and findings, the report said that Mrs. Dalrymple-Philibert was required to file statutory declarations and that she failed to include in those declarations a certain asset she held. They're talking there about the car. And the report says the investigation also identified breaches of the terms and conditions of a 20% duty concession which had been granted to her, and therefore breaches of the Customs Act. The investigation was carried out based on a referral by the Director of Information and Complaints of the Integrity Commission on behalf of the commissioners of the Integrity Commission. And this was because of concerns that she may have been in breach of the Integrity Commission Act because she hadn't disclosed in her statutory declarations that she owned a Mercedes-Benz GLA 250. Having reviewed the matter, the director says he expanded the scope of the investigation to include the circumstances surrounding a 20% duty concession that Mrs. Dalrymple-Philibert had got from the Ministry of Finance and Public Service to buy the car, which was to be used by her in connection with her public duties. The report then, as usual, goes through the law that relates to the particular investigation. So Mrs. Dalrymple-Philibert submitted her declaration for the year 2020, and she was sent a letter that said, if you believe you have omitted any other information, kindly provide particulars. For the avoidance of doubt, for each asset indicates source of funds. The director said he's in possession of her letter of response dated March 29, 2022. She indicated that she does not own a 2015 Mercedes-Benz GLA 250, and they quote from the letter that says, 2015 Mercedes-Benz, I do not own said motor vehicle and hereby request that the Commission corrects this error. So the report now highlights some excerpts from an interview conducted with Mrs. Dalrymple-Philibert on February 27, 2023. She was asked if the information in the declaration is an accurate and complete representation of her assets. And she said, I'm going to look at a document here to verify. I'm going to tell you now, I got a letter from the Integrity Commission about a vehicle I owned, a Benz. And I always said I never drove a Benz, so I wondered what they were talking about. When I got the letter to come to the Integrity Commission, I said I would go because I have nothing to hide. Last week when I sat in the Supreme Court, I remembered that I got a concession for a vehicle which my sister drove until she sold it. I never drove it. I never had possession. I also requested from Parliament a list of my concessions. They replied with a document showing I received concessions for 3 vehicles. The documents detail the Benz vehicle, and so I must declare it. She was asked if she was the owner of the Mercedes-Benz. She said, I must now admit I was the owner, although I did not remember at the time. She was shown the certificate of title and a signature and asked if that was her. She said yes. She was asked if she could remember signing the document, and she said yes. So the report then looks at how it is you can use a vehicle that you buy using a duty concession. Just as a reminder, a duty concession is given to certain types of public servants, parliamentarians, for use in their job. So what the government does is allow you to buy a new vehicle, but you don't pay the full tax that somebody else would pay. And this is because you're a public servant and because you're going to be using the vehicle in your job as a public servant. Now, because of that, the government has some very strict rules as to how you can use a vehicle bought by a duty concession, because what that means is that the government has given up some taxes to allow you to buy this vehicle. So they are saying these are the circumstances under which you can use this vehicle. So here are some of the terms and conditions. The car shall within 3 years of date of entry be used primarily by the traveling officer to whom the concession and exemptions have been granted. So after the car comes into the country for the first 3 years, the person who got the concession has to be the main person using the vehicle. The vehicle shall not be let or hired or used for commercial use during those 3 years. The officer to whom the concession is granted shall exercise continuous control over the car for the 3 years. Control over the vehicle shall not within that 3-year period be vested in a person other than the traveling officer by a power of attorney or any other method. And should the applicant be separated from the public service within 3 years of the date of importation or purchase of the vehicle, then full duties become payable. So all of this is saying that for 3 years after the vehicle comes into the country, if you were the officer, the public officer that got the duty concession, you are the one who is supposed to be using it. And if you leave government before the 3 years, you're going to owe them the full duty on the car. So the report says evidence from the Houses of Parliament, Ministry of Finance and Customs confirmed that Mrs. Dalrymple-Philibert applied for and obtained a 20% duty concession to acquire the 2015 Mercedes-Benz in the year 2015. This was because she was a parliamentarian. So in a February 27, 23 interview, the report shows some excerpts. She was shown a copy of the 20% duty concession in relation to the vehicle and asked if that was her signature. She said yes. Can you recall signing this document? She said, I know I signed it. I can't recall when I did. She was asked, how was the car purchased? She said, most things were done through my husband. There was a small loan for which my sister received assistance. All the vehicles I have can be traced back to funds in my husband's accounts. She was asked if she held or guaranteed a motor vehicle loan with Sagicor in relation to the Benz between December 2015 and December 21. She said, no, not to the best of my knowledge. There was loan with Sagicor, but I don't quite remember what for. She was shown a document from Sagicor and asked if she was guarantor on the loan from the 2015 Mercedes-Benz. She said, what do you mean by guarantor? I don't remember. The person who you see here on the document is the father of my sister's only child, who is also my only nephew. I could just add that the name that appears on this document, that's Mr. Eatman, is a person who I may have guaranteed for, as I've had confidence in his integrity for 43 years. She was shown a page of the loan application that dealt with guarantee. She said, it says I guaranteed it, so it means I guaranteed it. But again, this is a person I may have guaranteed for, as I have absolute confidence in for 43 years. She was asked how was the vehicle bought. She said through the loan then from Sagicor. She was asked, was the purchase funded by you? She said, the loan was guaranteed by me, and I'm pretty sure my husband would have made payments and Mr. Eatman would have made payments. And now that you say it, we would have looked at Nova Scotia in Falmouth, and at the time, interest rates were very expensive. The report says inquiries revealed that the initial deposit of $200,000 was made by Mr. Eatman, then a bank loan of $5,800,000 was obtained by Mr. Eatman. Both payments were to buy the vehicle. The full duty list price, meaning if you're paying full duty on the vehicle, the price would have been $8.1 million. With the 20% duty concession, the price was $6,580,000. And the 20% duty concession special price was $6 million. And the vehicle was bought at a cost of $6 million. So Mrs. Dalrymple-Philibert, the report says, would have benefited from a duty exemption of at least $1.5 million, $20,000. Also, the bank loan was guaranteed by Mrs. Dalrymple-Philibert. So Mr. Eaton was interviewed. He said he was Mrs. Dalrymple's nephew. He said the vehicle was kept in Kingston and used by Mrs. Dalrymple and other family members. It was driven by Agneta, that is Mrs. Dalrymple's sister, and used by Mrs. Dalrymple whenever she was in Kingston. Other family members, including me and my son, used it from time to time. Benz was owned by Mrs. Dalrymple-Philibert. In late 2015, early 2016, he discussed the purchase, he said, and made arrangement with Sagicor for a loan of $5 million plus for the purchase. He applied for the loan. It was guaranteed by Mrs. Dalrymple-Philibert, and she put up the car as security. He said the loan was repaid by him and Mr. Sherald Philibert, and it has now been repaid in full. He said he can't remember who collected the vehicle, whether him, his partner, or who. He said he made arrangements to pay the insurance, and Mrs. Dalrymple-Philibert helped to pay the insurance, and the vehicle was sold the year before the interview. He said he was aware that it was bought with a duty concession. The director says he has evidence showing that she initially applied for insurance for the Benz, that she subsequently acquired insurance for the Benz, that she completed and signed another customer information form, and the report says it can be reasonably inferred that throughout the period under consideration, Mrs. Dalrymple-Philibert was not only aware that she was the owner of the Benz, but that she played an active role in getting insurance for it. Then the issue of use of the vehicle, and they go back to a question that she had been asked about whether or not her declarations were complete. And she said in that answer, "I remember that I got a concession for a vehicle which my sister drove until she sold it. I never drove it. I never had possession." In a later question, she was asked, "Had you ever taken possession or driven the vehicle?" She said, "Yes, I have taken possession. I applied for it and I got it." "When you say possession, what do you mean?" She said, "Up to recently when you wrote me, I vehemently took the position that I didn't have the Benz. I really did not remember how long, if it was for a minute or a day or for 2 days or for 2 months, because my sister had the vehicle for so long in Kingston. Also, it was not listed in my personal records and documents. It was genuinely not included because I was not driving it. It was not a deliberate attempt to knowingly not disclose any information or the vehicle. I have no reason not to declare anything." She was asked if she received any funds from the Benz. She said, "No, I received no funds from the sale of this vehicle." The director says he notes the inconsistency between two of her answers in relation to whether she had possession of the vehicle. The report then says that contrary to Mrs. Dalrymple-Philibert's account, her sister Agneta Vieira indicated in her statement dated March 20, 2023 that the Benz was in the control and possession of Mrs. Dalrymple-Philibert, and that she, Ms. Vieira, used it when she needed a vehicle or was doing business. They quoted from her statement, but that's redacted, meaning we don't see that part. I'm going to stop the video at this point and then finish up what it says along with the discussions, the findings, and the recommendations in a part 2 of this video. All right? Thank you so much for joining me courtside. I'm Dionne. I'll see you next time.